A woman walks into the center of a dusty western town. Every man is watching. Some are laughing. Some are sneering. And she points at a complete stranger, a cowboy she has never met, and says these words in front of everyone. "Tonight, you are coming to my bed." The whole plaza explodes with laughter. But she is not joking. She is not crazy. She is desperate. Her father was murdered, poisoned slowly by a powerful man who wants her land. And a twisted law says she has 30 days to find a husband or lose everything her father built. Every man who tried to court her vanished, scared off, bought off, or worse. She has 23 days left, and this stranger with the gun on his hip is her last hope. What happens next will shock you, betray you, make you cry, and ultimately make you believe in justice again. This is the story of Martha Coleman, the mountain medicine woman who refused to break. This story reminds us that courage is not the absence of fear. It is taking action when you are terrified. It teaches us that the right partner does not complete you. They stand beside you while you complete yourself. And it proves that one person with enough determination can bring down an empire built on lies. If this message resonates with you, drop a comment telling me what you would have done in Martha's situation. Hit that like button if you believe in fighting for what is right. Share this with someone who needs to hear that it is never too late to stand up, and subscribe so you never miss another story that will move your heart. Now let the story begin. The first thing anyone noticed in Cedar Ridge that August afternoon was the heat. It pressed down like a hammer on the dusty plaza. The packed earth felt as hard as iron beneath worn boots. Cowboys leaned against hitching posts with lazy confidence. Their spurs flashed silver with each shift of their weight. Merchants called out from faded storefronts. Women hurried past with lowered eyes. Parasols tilted to shield their faces from both the blazing sun and the crude looks men tossed their way. Nothing unusual. Just another day in a mountain town that survived on stubbornness and silver dreams. Until Martha Coleman walked into the plaza. People always whispered when she came through. Some called her the mountain medicine woman when they needed her help. Others used uglier names when they did not. That was the way of things in Cedar Ridge. A woman like Martha learned early that kindness came with conditions. Martha stood tall in the center of the square. Her dark skin shone with sweat under the brutal sun. Her homespun dress was practical and simple. Nothing fancy. Nothing that drew attention on purpose. A heavy leather satchel hung from her shoulder. It was stuffed with herbs, roots, and remedies she gathered from the mountains she knew better than anyone alive. She stopped dead center in the plaza. Her eyes scanned the men gathered there, sharp eyes, steady eyes, searching for one man in particular, and when she found him, everything stopped. A lone cowboy sat on the saloon steps. Trail dust covered his clothes like he had been riding for days. His hat was pulled low. His hand rested near his holstered Colt, with an ease that told folks he knew how to use it. He had not laughed or sneered like the others when Martha appeared. Instead, he only watched her with calm gray eyes, cool as winter steel. Martha marched straight toward him. The plaza went silent. Folks sensed something big coming. She stopped 3 feet from him. He had to tilt his head back to meet her gaze. "You," she said. Her voice carried across the square like a church bell. "Tonight, you are coming to my bed." The plaza exploded. Laughter, catcalls, whistles. Cowboys slapped their knees and howled at the sight of a woman, especially her, making such a bold declaration. Some men nearly choked on their tobacco. Others nudged each other with knowing grins. But the cowboy did not laugh. His eyes stayed fixed on Martha. And unlike everyone around them, he saw the truth, her trembling fists, the tight set of her jaw, the desperate courage holding her together like rope around a breaking barrel. "Ma'am," he said quietly. His voice was low and steady. "That is a mighty bold thing to say in the middle of town." "I'm not talking about anything improper," Martha replied. She lifted her chin. "I need a husband. Legal. Today. And you are the only man here who might listen before laughing." The laughter died instantly. This was not a joke anymore. Property, inheritance, marriage. In Cedar Ridge, these things were serious business, the kind of business that made men kill and women weep. The cowboy stood. He rose taller than her by 4 inches, broad shoulders, steady hands, the kind of man who had seen trouble and walked through it. "Name is Samuel Hawkins," he said. "Most folks call me Sam." "Martha Coleman," she replied. "My father was Josiah Coleman." Sam's eyes changed. Everyone had heard of Josiah Coleman, the freedman who had somehow secured 1,200 acres of silver-rich mountain land. Everyone also knew he had died under suspicious circumstances 3 months earlier. The talk in saloons said it was mountain fever. The whispers in shadows said something else entirely. "You are having trouble with your father's land," Sam said carefully. "Trouble is one way to put it," Martha said bitterly. She pulled a folded document from her satchel. "The territorial court says I have 30 days to marry or lose everything my father built. I have 23 days left. Aldrich wants the land, and every man who tried courting me suddenly left town. All 3 of them vanished like smoke." Sam did not flinch. "Why me?" "Because you have been here 3 days, and you have not bent the knee to Aldrich yet," she answered. "You are honest, or smart enough to pretend to be. And that is more than I can say for most men in this town. And what exactly are you offering me?" "A partnership," Martha said. "Marriage in name only. A legal shield. I keep my land. You get 20% of the silver profits and a place to stay when you are in town. After a year, we divorce quietly and go our separate ways. No hard feelings, no complications." Sam studied her for a long moment. The silent crowd leaned in, hungry to hear how the stranger would answer. Betting pools were already forming in men's minds. "And if I say no?" Martha swallowed hard. "Then Aldrich takes everything my father worked for. And I spend the rest of my life knowing I failed him." The weight of those words hung in the air. Sam could see it. The grief, the fear, the fierce determination that refused to die even when everything else had. "When do you want this done?" Sam asked at last. "Tomorrow," Martha said. "Judge Peters rides through at noon." "Tonight," Sam interrupted. His voice was firm. "Reverend Mills can marry us before anyone has time to interfere." Martha blinked. She had not expected him to agree so quickly. Most men would have demanded time to think, time to weigh their options, time to consult with Aldrich about whether this was wise. "You mean that?" she asked. "I do," Sam said. "But first, you and I need to talk in private." He offered his arm. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The gesture was simple, respectful, something none of them had expected. A white man offering his arm to a colored woman in the middle of Cedar Ridge. It was the kind of thing that started fights, the kind of thing that made headlines. Martha hesitated for only a heartbeat before taking it. As they walked away, Sam glanced toward the general store window. A man stood inside, watching them with cold, angry eyes. His suit was too fine for this dusty town. His face was too smooth for honest work. "Mayor Aldrich," Martha murmured. "He will not let this happen," Sam said quietly. "I know," Martha replied. "That is why I chose a man wearing a gun." They walked through the dusty street, past the blacksmith shop where hammers rang against iron, past the general store where women pretended not to stare, past the boarding house where curtains twitched. Everyone watched. Everyone wondered. And in the mayor's office, Aldrich was already planning his response. The church stood at the edge of town, small, white, weathered by mountain winters. Sunlight streamed through plain glass windows. Long shadows stretched across empty pews. Sam settled onto a bench. He gestured toward the seat beside him. Martha sat. Her back stayed straight. Her hands stayed folded. But he could see the exhaustion beneath her pride. "Now," Sam said, "tell me everything, the real story. Not the version you tell strangers, not the version that sounds polite. the truth. Martha looked at him for a long moment, measuring him, deciding whether to trust. Then she began to speak, and the story she told would change both their lives forever. "My father was a dreamer," Martha began. Her voice was soft but steady, the kind of voice that had told this story to herself 1,000 times in the dark. He was born a slave in Georgia, worked cotton fields until his hands bled. But he learned to read in secret, learned numbers, learned to think bigger than the life they gave him. Sam listened without interrupting. His gray eyes never left her face. When the war ended, Martha continued, Papa headed west. Everyone said he was crazy, a colored man alone in the territories. But he had a gift. He could read the land, see where water ran underground, feel where the earth held secrets. She paused. Her fingers traced the worn edge of her satchel. He found this valley in '68, claimed 1,200 acres before anyone else knew what was here, built a cabin with his own hands, planted crops, raised livestock, made friends with the Ute people who taught him which plants healed and which ones killed. "And the silver?" Sam asked. Martha's jaw tightened. "Papa found the vein 3 years ago. Kept it quiet. He knew what would happen if word got out. White men would come with lawyers and guns. They would find ways to take everything. So he told no one." "Only me," Martha said. And somehow, Aldrich found out anyway. She pulled something from her satchel, a small glass vial. She placed it in Sam's hand. Sam held it up to the light filtering through the church windows. Clear liquid, almost like water. But something about it made his stomach turn. "Mercury," Martha said. "Someone poisoned my father." Sam's grip tightened on the vial. "Go on." "It started 6 months ago," Martha said. "Papa began having headaches, tremors in his hands. He could not remember simple things. Doc Morrison said it was mountain fever, said there was nothing to be done, just rest and prayer." "But you did not believe that?" Martha shook her head. "Papa was the healthiest man I knew, 62 years old and still outworking men half his age. Then suddenly, he could not hold a cup without spilling." She wiped her eyes quickly, angrily, as if the tears were a betrayal. "I found that vial hidden in his medicine chest after he died. Took it to a chemist in Denver. He confirmed it. Mercury poisoning. Slow, deliberate. Enough to break his mind without killing him quickly." Sam set the vial down carefully. "And Aldrich?" Martha's eyes burned. "Mayor William Aldrich arrived in Cedar Ridge 2 years ago, bought up half the town before anyone knew what was happening. General store, freight company, the boarding house. Even has the doctor and half the deputies in his pocket. He discovered the silver." "Someone talked," Martha said bitterly. "I do not know who. But Aldrich came to Papa with an offer. $50 for the whole claim." Papa laughed in his face. Sam could imagine that conversation. A proud man. A fair offer that was really a threat. Two stubborn wills colliding. After that, Martha continued, strange things started happening. Fences cut. Livestock scattered. Then Papa got sick. And the day after he died, Aldrich showed up with a document. The 30-day marriage law. Martha nodded. Some old territorial statute nobody had heard of. Says a single woman cannot hold property without a male guardian unless she marries within 30 days of inheriting. If she does not marry, the land goes to public auction. And Aldrich would be the only bidder. "He has already scared off everyone else," Martha said. "The 3 men who tried courting me, Thomas Garrett from the general store, Billy Turner, the blacksmith's son, Miguel Reyes from the Valley Ranch, all of them gone within a week." Sam leaned back. His mind was working through the pieces, fitting them together like a puzzle. "So you need a husband who is not afraid of Aldrich," he said. "Someone who cannot be bought or scared off." Martha met his gaze directly. "I need a partner, someone willing to fight. And you think I am that man." "You are still here," Martha said simply. 3 days in Cedar Ridge, and you have not taken a job with Aldrich. Have not bent the knee. Have not disappeared like the others." Sam was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the sun was setting. Orange light painted the church walls like fire. "What happened to your mother?" he asked. Martha's expression softened with old grief. "She died bringing me into this world. Papa raised me alone, taught me everything he knew about healing, about surviving, about standing tall when the world wants you small." Sam nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "Let us talk about this arrangement." Martha straightened. "What do you want to know?" "If we are going to make this work," Sam said, "we need to be smart. Aldrich has money, men, influence. What do we have?" Martha pulled another item from her satchel, her father's strongbox key. "My father kept records of everything," she said. "Every transaction, every threat, every suspicious visitor. He knew trouble was coming. He prepared. Smart man. He was the smartest man I ever knew," Martha said fiercely, "and I will not let them bury his legacy along with his body." Sam stood. He walked to the church window, looked out at Cedar Ridge settling into evening shadows. "Here is what I am thinking," he said. "We marry tonight, before Aldrich can organize opposition. Tomorrow we secure your father's papers. Then we start building allies. This town is not all Aldrich men. There have to be others who are tired of his grip." Martha rose and joined him at the window. "There are. Thomas Garrett owes Aldrich money but hates him. The Chen family runs the laundry and Aldrich has been squeezing them for years. Old Pete Winters remembers when this town was free." "Good," Sam said. "We will need every one of them." Martha turned to face him. "Why are you doing this?" Sam was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "I have spent 10 years drifting," he said finally. "Town to town, job to job, never staying long enough to matter, never caring enough to fight for anything. And now?" Sam met her eyes. "Maybe I am tired of running. Maybe I saw something in you today that reminded me what courage looks like. Or maybe I just do not like men who poison old folks and steal from their daughters." Martha almost smiled. "That is a lot of maybes." "Life is full of them," Sam said. "But here is one thing that is certain. If we do this, we do it together. Partners, equals. I do not give orders, and you do not bow. Agreed?" Martha extended her hand. "Agreed." They shook on it. Her grip was firm, calloused from years of hard work. Sam respected that. "Now," he said, "let us go find that reverend." They left the church as the last light faded behind the mountains. Cedar Ridge lay quiet in the valley, but it was the kind of quiet that warned trouble was already forming in the shadows. And watching from his office window, Mayor Aldrich was already making plans of his own. Reverend Mills was a small man, with large spectacles and a permanent look of mild surprise. He had been preparing for bed when Sam knocked on his door. But when he heard their request, his surprise turned to something else, something that looked like hope. "I have known Martha since she was a child," the Reverend said as he pulled on his coat. "Her father was a good man, one of the best I ever met. If this helps protect his legacy, then I am honored to perform the ceremony." They walked to the church through empty streets. Lantern light flickered in windows. Somewhere, a dog barked. The mountains rose dark and silent against the star-filled sky. Mrs. Chen met them at the church door. She was a small woman with steel-gray hair and sharper eyes. Beside her stood old Pete Winters, 70 years old with a back still straight as a fence post. "We heard what happened in the plaza," Mrs. Chen said. "Word travels fast in Cedar Ridge." "You came to witness," Martha said. It was not a question. "We came to stand with you," Pete corrected. "Your father helped my family through 3 hard winters. Least I can do is watch his daughter get married proper." Martha's eyes glistened. But she held herself together. There would be time for tears later. Right now she needed strength. The ceremony was simple. No flowers, no music, no fine clothes or fancy decorations. Just 2 strangers standing before God and 3 witnesses, making promises that would bind them together through whatever storms lay ahead. "Do you, Samuel Hawkins, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Reverend Mills asked. I do, Sam said. His voice was steady and clear. Do you, Martha Coleman, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Martha looked at Sam. This stranger who had agreed to fight beside her, this cowboy with the calm gray eyes and the gun on his hip, she barely knew him. And yet somehow, standing here in this moment, she felt less alone than she had in months. I do, she said. Her voice was stronger than she expected. The Reverend smiled. Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. The moment hung in the air. Sam lifted Martha's hand. Instead of shaking it like the Reverend suggested, he raised it to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. Something shifted. Martha felt it. Sam felt it. Even the witnesses noticed. A current passing between them. A spark that had nothing to do with business arrangements or legal shields. Well, Pete said gruffly, that was not in the agreement I heard about. Before anyone could respond, the church doors burst open. Jake Morrison marched in with 3 men behind him. Morrison was the doctor's brother and Aldrich's foreman, a man with a cruel mouth and crueler hands. His reputation for violence preceded him everywhere he went. Sam moved instantly. He placed himself between the trouble and his new wife. His hand rested on his gun, not drawing, not yet, but ready. Well, well, Morrison sneered. Look what we have here. Too bad we did not arrive a few minutes earlier. Could have stopped this whole circus. You are in a house of God, Reverend Mills said firmly. I will ask you to show respect. Morrison ignored him. His eyes were fixed on Sam. I heard about you, Hawkins. They say you are fast. They say you have killed men. I have done what needed doing, Sam replied calmly. No more, no less. Morrison's men spread out, flanking positions. They had done this before. Here's the thing, Morrison said. Aldrich does not care about some shotgun wedding. He has lawyers, lots of them. This little ceremony will not hold up in any court. Then why are you here? Martha asked. Her voice did not waver. Morrison pulled a folded letter from his coat. He tossed it at Martha's feet. Your father owed debts, he said. Big ones. Due in 1 week. Aldrich is calling them in. Martha snatched up the paper. She read it quickly. Her face went pale, then flushed with anger. This is forged, she said. My father never borrowed a dime from anyone. He built everything with his own hands and his own sweat. Judge might not see it that way, Morrison replied. Not when the mayor explains how poor old Josiah got confused near the end. Started signing things he did not understand. Mountain fever does that to a man. Sam's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed level. We will show the judge the truth. Morrison smirked. If you live long enough. He turned to leave, his men followed. At the door, he paused and looked back. You have 1 week, he said. Enjoy your honeymoon. Then they were gone. The moment the door closed, Martha sagged. The strength that had held her upright through the confrontation drained away. Sam caught her elbow gently. They are scared, he said quietly. That is why they came here to threaten us. If they were confident, they would have waited for court. Martha looked at the forged document in her hands. We need my father's strongbox, his real papers, the contracts and receipts that prove he never borrowed anything. Then let us get home and prepare, Sam said. They left the church together. Mrs. Chen and Pete walked with them as escorts. The streets were dark now. Shadows pooled between buildings like spilled ink. Every footstep seemed too loud. They reached Martha's cabin without incident, but Sam checked every shadow before letting her through the door. Old habits, hard to break. The cabin was solid, built with care by hands that knew hard work. Shelves lined the walls, filled with jars of herbs and dried plants. Medical books sat stacked near a worn work table. The smell of pine smoke drifted from the fireplace. This was the home of someone who had learned to survive in a world that often wished she would not. Sam stood near the door, taking it all in. Your father taught you well, he said. He taught me to stay standing when the world wants you on your knees, Martha replied softly. She hung her satchel beside the door and turned to face him. This is where I live, where my father died, where Aldrich wants to take everything from me. Sam nodded. Where is the strongbox? Martha knelt beside the fireplace. She pressed a hidden catch in the hearthstone. A panel swung open, revealing a metal box about the size of a loaf of bread. Papa built this cabin himself, she said. He built in secrets everywhere. She opened the box. Inside were papers, contracts, journals, land deeds, receipts dating back years, everything her father had saved. Sam examined them carefully. This is good, he said. Better than good. This proves ownership going back 5 years. Clear title, no debts, no liens. There is more, Martha said. She pulled out a small leather journal. Papa kept records of every suspicious incident, every threat Aldrich made, every man who came sniffing around the property. Sam flipped through the pages. Names, dates, details. It was a gold mine of evidence. Your father was preparing for a fight, Sam said. He knew it was coming, Martha replied. He just did not live to see it through. Sam closed the journal. He looked at Martha, really looked at her. The exhaustion carved into her features, the grief she carried like a stone, the fierce determination burning beneath it all. You know this marriage, he said quietly. It means I stand with you, whatever comes. Martha met his gaze. Partners? Partners, Sam confirmed. Your fight is mine now. Outside, the night grew colder. Wind whispered through the pines. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called. But inside the cabin, for the first time since her father's death, Martha felt something she thought she had lost forever. Hope. 3 days after the wedding, Sam woke to the sharp smell of smoke. His eyes snapped open. Years of sleeping rough had trained him to wake at the slightest hint of danger. He rolled out of his bunk in the small room beside the barn. His gun was in his hand before his feet hit the floor. Outside, the night was alive with orange light. Flames crawled up the walls of Martha's supply shed. The fire crackled and roared, louder than the wind, louder than the pounding of his heart. "Martha!" Sam shouted. She was already there, barefoot in her nightdress and shawl, hauling buckets of water from the well with fierce determination. Her face was painted gold by the firelight. Her eyes blazed with fury. 3 months of work was in that shed. Herbs, remedies, healing supplies, everything she needed to serve the people who depended on her medicine. I have got the well, Sam said. He grabbed a bucket and started pumping with fast, powerful strokes. Water splashed into the wooden pail. He ran, threw, ran back, pumped again. Together they worked, side by side, breath coming in gasps, muscles burning, the heat pressed against them like a living thing. Finally, the last ember hissed out. Martha knelt in the ash, coughing, soot streaking her face. She picked up a burnt jar. Her fingers were shaking. 3 months, she whispered. 3 months of gathering and drying and preparing. Winter fever season is coming. People depend on me. Sam crouched near the charred boards. His eyes narrowed. His fingers touched something slick on the wood. Coal oil, he said. Someone splashed it across the walls. Deliberate. Sam found a boot print in the dirt, left heel worn down. A distinctive mark. Morrison, Sam said. He did this. Martha stood slowly. Her grief hardened into something sharp, something dangerous. Then let us go find him. Sam did not argue. He recognized the fire in her eyes. It matched his own. They saddled horses as dawn broke pink over the mountains, rode into Cedar Ridge with the sun at their backs, found Jake Morrison at the boarding house, sitting at his breakfast table, eggs and coffee and satisfied smile. Sam did not knock. He kicked the door open, strode across the room, grabbed Morrison's table and flipped it over. Eggs and coffee and dishes crashed to the floor. That, Sam said coldly, is for the fire. Morrison jumped to his feet. His hand darted toward his gun. but Sam already had his Colt leveled at the man's chest. "And this," Sam added calmly, "is me asking where you bought your coal oil yesterday." Morrison froze. His eyes flicked to his men in the corners of the room. 3 of them, all watching, none moving. They knew Sam's reputation. "You got proof?" Morrison snarled. "I have got your boot print," Sam said. "I have got the whole town whispering. And I have got a wife who lost 3 months of work because you crawl around in the dark doing Aldrich's dirty work." Morrison's jaw clenched. "What do you want?" $60, Sam said. "Paid now." "60? You are out of your mind." Sam cocked the hammer. The click echoed in the silent room. Morrison swallowed hard. He reached for his wallet, started counting bills with trembling hands. Sam took the money, tucked it into his pocket. Then Martha stepped forward. Her voice was steady as stone. "And next time," she said, "try being a man. Come in daylight." She turned and walked out, head high, back straight, like a queen leaving a courtroom. Sam followed, never taking his eyes off Morrison until the door closed behind them. Outside, Martha let out a long, shaky breath. That was risky. "No," Sam said. "That was necessary. Aldrich makes moves. We make moves back. That is how this works. What is our next move?" Sam looked toward the center of town. People were watching from windows and doorways, whispering nervously. "Find allies," he said. "Build strength. Make them see they do not have to be afraid anymore." They did not have to look far. Thomas Garrett came hurrying toward them. The general store owner looked worse than the last time Sam had seen him. Dark circles under his eyes, shoulders bent with worry. "You heard what happened," Sam said. It was not a question. "Everyone heard," Garrett said. "The whole town is talking." He lowered his voice. "I just got back from a supply run, empty-handed. Aldrich doubled the freight rates. I am drowning." Martha touched his arm gently. "Thomas, what if we challenged his freight monopoly?" Garrett's eyes widened. "You would need capital, protection, partners." "We are building all 3, Sam said, "starting today." Next came Henry Wallace, the blacksmith, then Sarah Cooper, the seamstress, the Reyes family from the Valley Ranch, miners who worked long hours while Aldrich skimmed their profits. Everywhere Sam and Martha went, the story was the same. Fear, anger, and beneath it all, a desperate longing for hope. "Aldrich has had this town by the throat for 2 years, Sarah Cooper whispered. "People want to fight. They just need someone to show them how." Sam nodded. "Then let us show them." The turning point came near the saloon. A crowd had gathered in the street. Morrison's men surrounded Mrs. Chen. Her laundry baskets lay scattered in the dust. Clean linens trampled into the dirt. "Town Council passed a new ordinance," Morrison announced loudly. "No foreign laundry operations inside city limits." Mrs. Chen stood firm, small but unbowed. "I have served this town 20 years, she said. 20 years of clean clothes and fair prices." Morrison grabbed her arm. "Time to pack up and move along, Chinawoman." He never finished the motion. Sam's hand clamped onto Morrison's wrist. He twisted hard enough to drive the man to his knees. The crowd gasped. "The lady does not need your help," Sam said coldly. "And an ordinance passed at midnight without public vote is not worth the paper it is written on. Funny how Aldrich writes laws to suit himself." Morrison struggled. Sam's grip tightened. Martha stepped forward. She raised her voice so everyone could hear. "Town meeting tonight," she announced, 7 o'clock. "Everyone who owns property has the right to vote. That is territorial statute. Look it up." "You cannot call a meeting," Morrison spat. "She can," Sam said. And she did. "Question is, will the good people of Cedar Ridge show up?" Hands went up all over the street. "Yes, we will be there. Count me in." Sam released Morrison. The man stumbled backward. His face was red with fury and humiliation. "This is not over," he growled. Sam smiled coldly. "I am counting on it." By 7 o'clock, the meeting hall was packed. People stood shoulder to shoulder. Ranchers and miners, shopkeepers and housewives. Mexican families and Chinese immigrants and freed slaves who had come west looking for new lives. Cedar Ridge was small, but tonight it felt alive in a way it had not for years. Aldrich's men tried to block the door, a wall of muscle and mean stares. But the crowd pushed past them, one by one, family by family, until even Morrison had to step aside or be trampled. Martha took the podium. She looked out at the faces before her. Some she had known her whole life. Others were strangers. But they all shared something. A weariness, a hunger, a desperate need for someone to say what they were all feeling. She took a deep breath. "Cedar Ridge will not be ruled by fear," Martha said. Her voice carried clear and strong. "Not by men who poison the weak. Not by laws written to steal from working people. Not by threats in the night and fires that destroy what honest hands have built." The crowd stirred. Heads nodded. Someone called out, "Yes." "My father came to this valley with nothing," Martha continued. "He built a home with his own 2 hands. He helped anyone who needed it. Black or white or brown or any color under God's sun. He believed in something. He believed that hard work should be rewarded, that honest people should be able to keep what they earn, that this land belongs to anyone brave enough to claim it." She paused. Let the words settle. 3 months ago, my father died. Some say it was mountain fever, but I know the truth. He was poisoned, slowly, deliberately, by someone who wanted what he had built. Gasps rippled through the crowd. People who had only suspected now heard it spoken aloud. "I am not here to ask for pity," Martha said. "I am here to ask for something more important. I am here to ask you to stand up, not for me, for yourselves, for your children, for the town you want Cedar Ridge to become." Aldrich pushed through the crowd. His face was red. His expensive suit was wrinkled. "This is ridiculous," he shouted. "This woman is delusional. Her father was a confused old man who died of natural causes. She married a drifter to steal land that should be held in public trust." Martha did not flinch. "Public trust meaning your pocket," she replied. "Everyone knows about your freight monopoly, your predatory loans, the way you squeeze every business in town until they either pay tribute or disappear." Thomas Garrett stood up. "She is right. Aldrich raised my shipping costs 3 times this year alone. I cannot afford to stock my shelves." Henry Wallace, the blacksmith, rose. "He threatened to burn my shop if I did not sign over 10% of my earnings." Sarah Cooper. "My husband disappeared after he refused to sell our land. 3 years and no word." One by one they stood. Voices that had been silent for too long finally finding the courage to speak. Aldrich's face went pale. "This is slander. These are lies." Sam stepped forward. His voice was calm but carried to every corner of the room. "Tomorrow," he said, "Judge Carter arrives with a federal marshal. Every complaint spoken tonight will be recorded and submitted as evidence. Anyone with proof of wrongdoing, forged documents, threats, suspicious dealings, bring it forward." Aldrich's eyes went wide. "You cannot do this." "Already done," Sam replied. "We sent word 3 days ago the territorial government is very interested in corruption charges against a sitting mayor." The crowd erupted. Cheers, shouts, years of bottled frustration finally finding release. But Aldrich was not finished. He pushed toward the door. His men fell in behind him. At the threshold, he turned back. "You think you have won?" he snarled at Martha. "You think some speech and a few complaints will stop me? I own this town. I own the sheriff. I own the courts. And I will see you buried next to your father before I let some colored woman take what is mine." He stormed out. The door slammed behind him. The hall went quiet. The excitement of moments before faded. Reality set in. Aldrich was wounded. But wounded animals were the most dangerous. Sam moved to Martha's side. He took her hand. "Let them come," he said quietly. "We are ready." Martha looked at him. The fear was still there. But so was something else, a fierce joy, a wild hope. "Thank you," she whispered, for standing with me." "Partners," Sam replied. "Remember?" That night they walked home under a sky full of stars. The mountains rose dark and silent around them. Cedar Ridge lay quiet below. For the first time since her father's death, Martha let herself believe. Maybe they could win. Maybe justice would prevail. She did not know that the hardest test was still to come. 3 days after the town meeting, the Johnson boy collapsed. He was 12 years old, worked in the mines to support his widowed mother. That morning he staggered out of the shaft with fever burning in his eyes and barely made it home before his legs gave out. Doc Morrison arrived first. He examined the boy for 30 seconds. Then he stood up and shook his head. "Mine fever," he announced. "Nothing to be done. Prepare for burial." Mrs. Johnson wailed, clutched her son's hand. "Please, please. He is all I have." Morrison shrugged. "Sorry for your loss." He was walking toward the door when Martha appeared. She had heard the news from Pete Winters, grabbed her emergency supplies, run the whole way. "Let me see him," she said. Morrison blocked her path. "You have no authority here, no license, no training, just backwoods superstition." Martha met his eyes. "I have 15 years of studying medicine. I have saved more lives in this town than you have. And I am not going to watch a child die because you are too lazy or too ignorant to try." She pushed past him, knelt beside the boy. Her hands moved quickly, checking pulse, temperature, the color of his lips and fingernails. Sam appeared in the doorway. "What do you need?" "Hot water," Martha said without looking up. "Clean cloths. Willow bark from my satchel. And sulfur powder. Quickly." Sam moved. No questions, no hesitation. Morrison sneered. "You are wasting your time. The boy will be dead by morning." "Then you had better pray I am wrong," Martha replied. For his sake and yours, she worked through the night. Sulfur powder to fight the infection. Willow bark tea to bring down the fever. Cool cloths to draw out the heat. Hour after hour she labored, talking softly to the unconscious boy, telling him stories, singing hymns her father used to sing. Sam kept the fire going, brought fresh water, stood guard at the door. Word had spread. A crowd gathered outside, praying, waiting. At dawn, the boy's fever broke. His eyes fluttered open. "Mama?" he whispered. Mrs. Johnson sobbed, threw herself across her son. "Oh, thank God. Thank God." The crowd outside erupted in cheers. They surged toward the door, wanting to see, wanting to thank the woman who had done what the doctor could not. But Aldrich was already there. He pushed through the crowd. His face was twisted with fury. Deputies flanked him. "Arrest her," he demanded. "She practices medicine illegally. She endangered this child with her savage remedies. Arrest her now." The crowd went silent. The deputies hesitated. Sam stepped forward. His hand rested on his gun. "You want to arrest the woman who just saved this boy's life?" he said calmly. "In front of his mother? In front of the whole town?" Aldrich pointed at Martha. "She has no license, no authority. She is a danger to public health." Mrs. Johnson rose to her feet. Her voice shook with emotion. "This woman saved my son," she said. "She stayed with him all night. She never gave up. And you want to arrest her?" Other voices joined in. "Let her go. Leave her alone. She saved my daughter last winter. She healed my husband's wound." The deputies looked at each other, looked at the crowd, looked at Aldrich. "We cannot arrest her," the lead deputy said quietly. "Not like this. Not with the whole town watching." Aldrich's face went purple. "You are all fools. You will regret this." He turned and stormed away. The crowd parted for him, but no one followed. No one agreed. As Martha emerged from the Johnson house, people reached out to touch her, to thank her, to press coins and food and small tokens of gratitude into her hands. "Bless you," Mrs. Chen said. "You are one of us," Thomas Garrett added. Martha's eyes filled with tears, but she held herself together, nodded, smiled. "Thank you," she said. "Thank all of you." Sam took her arm, guided her through the crowd. They walked home through the brightening morning. "You did something incredible back there," he said quietly. Martha shook her head. "I just did what my father taught me, what anyone should do when someone needs help." Sam stopped walking. He turned to face her. "No," he said. "What you did was more than that. You showed this town what courage looks like. You showed them that one person can make a difference." Martha looked up at him. This close, she could see the gray flecks in his eyes, the lines around his mouth from years of squinting into sun and wind. "I could not have done it without you," she said. Sam shook his head. "You would have found a way. You are the strongest person I have ever met." Something passed between them, something neither of them was ready to name. Then Sam cleared his throat. "We should get home. The judge arrives tomorrow. We have work to do." "Yes," Martha agreed. "We do." They walked the rest of the way in comfortable silence. But that night, as Martha lay in her bed and Sam in his bunk by the barn, both of them stared at the ceiling, thinking about the other, wondering what tomorrow would bring, and whether this arrangement between them might be becoming something more. Judge Harrison Carter arrived at noon the next day. He came in a fine carriage with a federal marshal riding escort. Carter was a tall man with silver hair and eyes that had seen every kind of human wickedness and triumph. He had been adjudicating territorial disputes for 20 years. Nothing surprised him anymore. Almost nothing. When he saw the crowd waiting in the Cedar Ridge town square, his eyebrows rose slightly. This was no ordinary property dispute. "Court will convene in 1 hour," he announced. "Everyone with testimony or evidence will have a chance to speak." The town hall filled quickly. Every seat taken. People standing 3 deep along the walls. Windows propped open so those outside could hear. Aldrich arrived with a battalion of lawyers. 3 men in expensive suits, arms full of documents and ledgers and official-looking papers. Martha arrived with Sam and a single leather satchel. The contrast was not lost on anyone. Judge Carter took his seat at the front of the room. His gavel cracked once. "Order. We are here," he said, to settle the matter of property ownership regarding the land claim of the late Josiah Coleman. The plaintiff claims that the defendant, Martha Coleman Hawkins, has no legal right to the property. The defendant claims otherwise. Let us hear the evidence." Aldrich's lead lawyer stood. Smooth voice, expensive smile. "Your Honor," he began, "our case is simple. The territorial marriage statute clearly states that a single woman cannot inherit property without a male guardian. Miss Coleman failed to marry within the required 30 days. "Mrs. Hawkins," Martha corrected calmly. "I married Samuel Hawkins 3 days after my father's death. The certificate is here." She handed the document to the judge. Carter examined it carefully. "This appears to be in order. Reverend Mills's signature. 2 witnesses. All proper." The lawyer's smile tightened. "Very well. Even so, the property is encumbered by significant debts." He produced a stack of papers. "Josiah Coleman borrowed extensively from Mayor Aldrich's bank. These debts total over $2,000. They are due immediately upon death." Martha stood. "Permission to examine these documents, Your Honor." Carter nodded. "Go ahead." Martha took the papers. "Read them slowly." Her face remained calm, but Sam could see her hands tremble slightly. "These are forgeries," she said finally. "My father never borrowed money from anyone. He kept meticulous records of every transaction." She opened her satchel, produced her father's journals, his receipts, his contracts. "Here," she said, "is my father's handwriting. Compare it to the signatures on these loan documents. They are completely different." The room stirred. People craned their necks to see. "Furthermore," Martha continued, "these loan documents are dated during a period when my father was already suffering from illness. An illness caused by a mercury poisoning." "Objection," the lawyer shouted. "There is no proof of poisoning." Martha produced the glass vial. "I had this analyzed by a Denver chemist. His testimony is available by affidavit. Mercury was found in my father's medicine. Someone added it deliberately." The crowd gasped. Whispers spread like wildfire. Judge Carter's expression grew grave. This is a serious accusation. Do you have evidence connecting anyone to this alleged poisoning? Sam stood. Your Honor, may I speak? Carter nodded. 3 days after our wedding, Sam said, someone set fire to my wife's supply shed. I found boot prints at the scene. Distinctive prints with a worn left heel. He pointed at Jake Morrison sitting near Aldrich. The same prints match boots worn by that man. Morrison is Aldrich's foreman. The same man who delivered forged debt notices to our home. Morrison jumped to his feet. That is a lie. Is it? Sam replied. Then you would not mind if the marshal examines your boots? Morrison's face went white. He looked at Aldrich. Aldrich looked at his lawyers. The lawyers suddenly found their papers very interesting. The marshal walked toward Morrison. Hold out your boots, he ordered. Morrison backed away. This is harassment. I have rights. You have the right to show your boots or be held in contempt, Judge Carter said coldly. Choose. The room held its breath. Finally, Morrison pulled off his left boot, threw it toward the marshal. The worn heel was unmistakable. This proves nothing, Aldrich snarled. Boot heels wear down. It is circumstantial. Then let us add more circumstances, Martha said. She pulled another document from her satchel. This is a receipt from the Denver Chemical Supply Company, signed by William Aldrich, for 2 pounds of mercury compound, dated 6 months before my father began showing symptoms. Aldrich stood abruptly. This is outrageous. That receipt is forged. Someone is framing me. The chemist who sold you the mercury is outside, Sam said calmly. He is prepared to testify. The door opened. A small, nervous man in spectacles entered. He looked at Aldrich, then quickly looked away. That is him, the chemist said. He bought mercury from me, said it was for treating farm equipment, but he ordered 3 more shipments after that. I got suspicious, started keeping records. He handed a leather folder to Judge Carter. The room erupted. Shouts, accusations. Aldrich's lawyers scrambling to object. Morrison trying to slip toward the back door. The marshal blocked his path. Where do you think you are going? Order, Judge Carter thundered. His gavel cracked again and again. Order in this court. Slowly, silence fell. The judge looked at the evidence before him. The journals, the receipts, the chemist's testimony, the boot print evidence. Then he looked at Aldrich. Mayor Aldrich, he said slowly, I am placing you under arrest for fraud, attempted theft of property, and suspicion of murder. Aldrich lunged toward the door. You cannot do this. I am the mayor. I own this town. The marshal caught him, spun him around, snapped iron cuffs on his wrists. Not any more you do not, the marshal said. The crowd erupted again, but this time it was cheers, joy, years of fear and frustration finally finding release. Martha stood frozen, unable to believe what was happening. Sam moved to her side, put his hand on her shoulder. It is over, he whispered. You did it. Martha looked at him, tears streaming down her face. We did it, she corrected. Together. Sam smiled. His gray eyes were soft in a way she had never seen before. Together, he agreed. The trials lasted 3 days. Aldrich and Morrison were tried together. The evidence was overwhelming. The chemist testified. The forged documents were exposed. Witness after witness came forward with stories of threats and bribes and violence. By the time Judge Carter delivered his verdict, no one was surprised. William Aldrich, the judge pronounced, you are found guilty of fraud, extortion, and murder by poisoning. You will be transported to the territorial prison to await execution. Aldrich screamed, cursed, had to be dragged from the courtroom. Jake Morrison was sentenced to 20 years hard labor. His men received various sentences depending on their crimes. The corrupt deputies were stripped of their badges and run out of town. And Martha's land was declared legally hers, free and clear. No debts, no encumbrances. 1,200 acres of mountain property with a silver vein worth a fortune. The town celebrated for 3 days. There was dancing in the plaza, music from fiddles and guitars, tables loaded with food that people had been saving for special occasions. Children ran through the streets laughing. Old grudges were forgotten. Old friendships rekindled. Martha moved through the celebration like a woman in a dream. People kept stopping her, hugging her, thanking her, telling her that her father would be proud. She smiled, accepted their gratitude. But inside she felt strangely hollow. It was over. The fight she had been waging for months. The fear she had lived with for so long. All of it was finished. And now she did not know what came next. She found Sam at the edge of the celebration, standing alone, watching the stars. "Not joining the party?" she asked. Sam shrugged. "Never been much for crowds." He glanced at her. "You should be celebrating. You won." "We won," Martha corrected. Sam was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I have been thinking about our arrangement." Martha's heart stuttered. "Oh?" "We agreed on 1 year," Sam said. "Marriage of convenience. Then a quiet divorce." "But—" He turned to face her. The lamplight from the plaza caught the planes of his face. The strong jaw, the gentle eyes, "But things have changed," he said. "For me, anyway." Martha could not breathe. "What do you mean?" "I mean that when I agreed to this, I thought I was helping a stranger." Sam took a step closer. "I thought I would do my year, collect my share, move on. That is what I always did, keep moving. Never stay anywhere long enough to care. And now I cannot imagine leaving." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Martha felt tears prick her eyes. She had been so focused on the fight, on saving her father's land. She had not let herself think about what came after, about what Sam meant to her, but standing here now, looking at this man who had stood beside her through everything, who had faced down Morrison and Aldrich, who had never once made her feel weak or foolish or less than. She knew. "I do not want you to leave either," she whispered. Sam reached out, took her hand. His palm was rough and warm against hers. "This started as a business arrangement," he said, "but somewhere along the way it became something else. I think I started falling for you that first day. When you walked across that plaza and told a stranger he was coming to your bed." Martha laughed. A small, surprised sound. "I was terrified. You did not look it. You looked like a queen demanding tribute. I was desperate." Sam shook his head. "You were brave, the bravest person I've ever seen. And I have seen a lot." He lifted her hand, kissed her knuckles, just like he had at their wedding. "Martha," he said, "I know our marriage was supposed to be temporary, legal protection and nothing more. But I am asking you now, not for land or silver or any arrangement, just you." "What are you asking exactly?" Martha whispered. Sam smiled. His gray eyes were warm as summer rain. "I am asking if maybe you would consider keeping me around. Permanently. Not as a business partner, as a husband, a real one." Martha looked at him for a long moment. This man who had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she had not known how to speak, who had fought beside her, believed in her, stood with her when everyone else ran away. She had been alone for so long, carrying her father's legacy, carrying her own fear, carrying everything by herself because she did not know how to trust anyone else to help. But Sam had shown her different, had shown her that partnership did not mean weakness, that love did not mean losing yourself. "Yes," she said. Sam blinked. "Yes? Yes. I will keep you around. Permanently." Sam laughed, pulled her close, wrapped his arms around her. The celebration continued behind them, music and laughter and joy. But for Martha and Sam, the whole world had narrowed to this moment, this promise, this beginning. "I love you," Sam murmured against her hair. Martha smiled against his chest. "I love you too." Above them, the stars blazed bright over the mountains. The same mountains her father had loved, the same land he had fought for. She had kept her promise, saved his legacy. And somewhere in the process, she had found something she never expected. A home, a partner, a future. 6 months passed. Cedar Ridge transformed. The silver mine opened properly, with fair wages and safe conditions. Miners who had worked for years under Aldrich's cruel contracts now earned enough to buy homes, raise families, dream bigger. Martha used her share of the profits to build a medical clinic, a real one, with proper equipment and supplies. She hired a young doctor from Boston, a woman like herself who had been denied opportunity elsewhere. The freight monopoly was broken. Thomas Garrett's general store flourished. Henry Wallace, the blacksmith, expanded his shop. Sarah Cooper opened a dress shop that drew customers from 3 counties. And the school Martha's father had always dreamed of finally opened its doors. Children of all colors sat together learning to read and write, sons and daughters of miners and ranchers and former slaves. The future of Cedar Ridge. One evening, Martha stood in her garden, teaching a group of women about healing plants: lavender for headaches, chamomile for sleep, willow bark for fever. Sam approached with a letter in his hand. His smile was wide. "What is it?" Martha asked. "Good news." He handed her the envelope. "From Denver, the Territorial Medical Board." Martha opened it with trembling fingers. "Read the words once, twice, 3 times. "They want me to speak," she said, "at their annual conference about frontier medicine." Sam grinned. "Told you. People are paying attention." Martha looked at the letter, at her garden, at the clinic rising on the hill. "I never imagined any of this," she said softly. Sam put his arm around her shoulders. "Your father did. He knew you were special, even if you did not believe it yourself." That night they sat together on the porch, watching the lights of Cedar Ridge twinkle in the valley below. A town reborn. "You ever regret it?" Martha asked. "Staying here, giving up the drifting life?" Sam pulled her closer. "Not for a single heartbeat." Martha smiled, leaned against him. "Mrs. Chen is expecting her first grandchild," she said. Thomas Garrett proposed to the new schoolteacher. "Old Pete Winters says this is the happiest he has been since his wife passed." "All because of you," Sam said. "All because of us," Martha corrected. A shooting star streaked across the sky. Martha closed her eyes, made a wish. "What did you wish for?" Sam asked. Martha opened her eyes. "If I tell you, it will not come true." Sam laughed. "Fair enough." He kissed her forehead. "I already have everything I wished for anyway." They sat in comfortable silence. The night wrapped around them like a blanket. Years later, people in Cedar Ridge would tell stories about Martha Coleman Hawkins, the mountain medicine woman who saved the town, who stood up to corrupt power, who proved that one person with enough courage could change the world. But for Martha, the best part of her story was not the victory or the legend. It was this: simple moments on a porch with the man she loved, watching stars above the mountains. She had fought for her father's land, but what she had won was so much more: a home, a family, a life worth living, and that was worth every battle. 10 years later, Martha stood at the edge of her father's grave. The headstone was weathered now, softened by mountain winters. But the words were still clear. Josiah Coleman, beloved father, dreamer, builder, pioneer. She laid fresh flowers on the grave, wildflowers from the mountains he had loved so much. "I kept my promise, Papa," she whispered. "I kept everything you built, made it bigger, made it better, just like you taught me." The wind stirred the pines, like an answer. "Mama." Martha turned. A small girl ran toward her through the tall grass, 8 years old, with her father's gray eyes and her mother's determination. "Mama, Papa says dinner is ready." Martha smiled, scooped the girl into her arms. "Tell Papa I am coming." She looked back at the grave one more time. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Then she carried her daughter down the hill toward home. The cabin had grown over the years, extra rooms added for children, a bigger barn for more livestock, a workshop where Sam taught the boys to work with their hands. Tonight the table was crowded. Their 3 children, Mrs. Chen and her grandchildren, Thomas Garrett and his wife, old Pete Winters, 90 now but still straight as a fence post. Family. Not by blood, but by choice, by struggle, by love. Sam caught Martha's eye across the table, smiled that quiet smile she loved so much. After dinner, when the children were in bed and the guests had gone home, they walked to their porch, settled into their chairs, watched the stars appear one by one. "Do you remember," Sam said, "when you walked up to me in that plaza? Told me I was going to bed with you?" Martha laughed. "I was trying to scare you off. Worst plan ever. It worked out all right." Sam took her hand, laced his fingers through hers. "I love you," he said. "More now than that first day. More every day." Martha leaned against him. "I love you too. Always." Below them, Cedar Ridge glowed with lamplight. A town built by dreamers, saved by fighters. Home to people who refused to give up. Martha thought about all the battles they had fought, all the victories they had won, all the losses that had made them stronger. She thought about her father, his lessons, his love, his faith in her. She thought about the future, the children growing up strong and free, the clinic saving lives, the school teaching dreams. Her story had started with injustice and desperation. A woman alone against powerful enemies. A gamble on a stranger. But it had ended here, with love, with family, with everything she never dared to hope for. "Whatever comes next," Sam said quietly, "we face it together." Martha smiled. "Partners?" she said. "Remember? Always." The stars burned bright above the mountains. The same stars her father had watched. The same stars her children would watch. The same stars that would shine long after all of them were gone. But tonight, under that eternal sky, Martha Coleman Hawkins was exactly where she belonged. Home. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.